Welcome, everyone, to this webinar from HJ International Graduate School for Peace and Public Leadership. Thank you for joining on this program honoring Constitution Day. Constitution Day is actually an official day set aside by the U.S. Congress dating back to 1952. The exact date of Constitution Day is September the 17th, a date when the Constitution was originally signed, 1787, in Philadelphia. And academics, institutions, and schools are asked by the Congress to honor this day in some form, to pay respect to the Constitution, which we all benefit from in this country, and to underscore the importance of citizenship. So HDI has been convening programs on this in this month, shall we say. We couldn't always get the date, but in honor of Constitution Day. So thank you for being part of this. We're happy to have a presentation from one of our faculty member who has recently ascended to the spiritual world. That is none other than Professor William Ley. Now, Professor Ley taught a course over several years at HJI, and prior to that, in his teaching career at the University of Bridgeport, where he was a department chair and professor of criminal justice and law. And at his time at HGA, the course is entitled Human Rights, Law, and Government. And this past summer, he taught the course. It was all set up to teach it, but his health was fragile, shall we say, indeed quite fragile. But he was doing his best. In the end, it was a big task. So he and I that I would co-teach it with him, particularly if his health wasn't up to it. So I had a great benefit from that arrangement. Not only is Bill a dear friend, but also I could learn from him. And even as a co-teacher, I received much more than I gave, and was quite impressed with his knowledge and his communication skills. His pedagogical skills, his teaching skills are indeed impressive. Those of you on this program who know him from his years as a lecturer with CALSA know that he's a gifted and talented and very, very bright and capable man. And he has a law degree from Columbia University. He was editor of the Columbia Law Review and held a number of very important posts with major law firms and as a clerk for major justices. So great career. We miss him dearly. But tonight in this program, we're actually going to be students of Professor Ley. We're going to listen to one of about 18 lectures that he prepared for this course. Maybe it will stimulate you to take this course. We'll continue teaching it for sure into the future. But and then we have two very fine commentators who know Professor Ley well and are attorneys in their own right and have a great deal to add to this conversation, and that is Mr. Farley Jones and Peter Ross. And I'll introduce them briefly after we listen to Bill's lecture. So I'm sorry you won't see Bill on the screen like you're looking at me, because this is a recording of a lecture prepared for his students. So, and it will have a PowerPoint slide up, which is very useful pedagogically, and he will be placed in the upper corner. We can't, this is a recorded set format. So please understand that. And the lecture itself is about 42 minutes. So we've slightly adjusted the speed to, I think, 1.2 above normal, just so we can get it down closer to 30 minutes. And we all felt that it's still very much conveys the content very beautifully. And we get great intellectual and spiritual content, and we can feel Bill's presence with us at the same time. So once again, thank you all for being here this evening, and we'll now turn Angelica to Professor Lay's sample lecture that looks at constitutional law, some comparison of other constitutions such as the Swiss and the Republic of China's constitution, and a lot of interesting content that's very relevant to Constitution Day, and I think to all of us. He talks later in the course much more about religious freedom as well. So without further ado, Angelica, thank you. Welcome, everyone.
Begin our discussion. I have selected three representative constitutions. One is the U.S. Constitution. Another is the Constitution of Taiwan, which went into effect in 1947. I'm going to make available to you the version amended through 2005 because it reflects the Chinese development of the constitutional model, and the Swiss Constitution, a wonderful constitution, which the Swiss Federation is actually the first such federation. It predates the United States. However, the United States Constitution is highly influential, extremely important, and it is the one that I am most familiar with and that I can speak to in the most depth. So our focus will inevitably be somewhat directed to the U.S. Constitution. But let's proceed. And let's begin by considering this term, rights, which gets a lot of usage today, both in interpersonal conversation. People talk about their rights, and of course, also in the legal world and in the courts. And here is a quote that I'm sharing with you from a wonderful book called Declaring Rights by Professor Jack Rakov that I have found very valuable. And he writes, before the 17th century, this now potent word had a surprisingly limited meaning in English usage. In the legal sense, a right was nothing more than a valid title of ownership, especially as it related to property, parenthesis, land. So you see this word title. Now that's another legal term, title. Right meant nothing more than title to property and especially land. But amid the great political and religious disputes of the 17th century, the word right shed its original limited meaning and began to acquire its bewildering modern associations. Well, thank you, Professor Rakov. I feel better now. I'm not the only person who is bewildered by the current usage of the term right or rights. I'm not the only person who has reflected, are we talking about something real or are we talking about something illusory? You know, what are rights? And I also note this phrase, the great political and religious disputes of the 17th century. It reminds me of the phrase from the Divine Principle that the Peace of Westphalia actually triggers off the period of religious and ideological conflicts. So as this period of, which is the growth stage of the 400-year preparation period. But anyway, as we're in this chaotic period of conflict, the term right sheds its original meaning and comes to take on a bewildering number of modern associations. Now, here's one way to look at rights from a kind of legal definition point of view. A moral or legal entitlement to have or obtain something or to act in a certain way. And I want to draw the distinction, which is very important, between positive law or natural law. So when we're using this term right, are we talking about a man-made right, so to speak, a positive law right, something that was created through, here I talk about how are positive law rights created. Well, the operation of the common law generated positive law rights. For example, as in the common law court system of England and carried on in the United States, it became a rule of the court that if you're negligent and you harm someone, you are liable for the damage that you cause. So we all have a right to be treated in a reasonably careful manner by everyone that we come in contact with. This is a common law right that was created by the courts as they considered and handled various disputes. Also, these constitutions, these wonderful constitutions that I showed you, and other constitutions, they create positive law rights. I mean, at least one view would be that they create them. I mean, it does say, for example, the language of the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, the famous Fourth Amendment, which is very important in criminal procedure, the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated. I mean, the way that's written, it seems to indicate that the right exists independently of this constitutional language. However, the Constitution tells the state, don't be violating it. Same thing with the Second Amendment. The right to keep and bear arms. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So even that constitutional language almost suggests that they are recognizing a natural law right and that they are simply instructing the government not to infringe on it. But a more conventional lawyer's approach would be that the positive law right, the positive law entitlement, is being created by the constitutional enactment. So I don't want to make it overly complicated. Positive law rights are rights that are created through legal processes, the operation of courts, the enactment of a constitution, the enactment of statutes by the legislature, or the actions of other branches of government. As the executive branch promulgates regulations, they can create rights. And look at this number 4 here, private contracts. We can create contract rights ourselves. This is almost like a fearful capability, okay? This is a scary capability that we have. I told you that under the common law, if you are negligent, that means careless. If you are negligent and you harm someone, you are going to be responsible for the damage that you caused. Well, maybe you don't even want to get out of bed in the morning, okay? I'm afraid I'm going to go out and carelessly cause harm to someone, and then I will have to pay for it. Well, that's life, okay? That is one of the rules of most legal systems. Don't be scared. Just be careful, reasonably careful, all right? That's all the law requires, reasonable care. Also, this business of contracts. We are empowered by the law to enter into binding agreements with other people. We can make promises. And after we make those promises, those mutual promises, which are called contracts, then they have a right. If I say, if you mow my lawn, I'll pay you $25. By the way, I mow my own lawn. Mowing the lawn means cutting the grass with a lawnmower. It's not really grass, but it's green vegetation, all right? And but if I say, look, if you mow my lawn, I'll pay you $25, and you say, okay, we have created rights. We have created rights. I have the right to have you perform, and you have the right to have me pay. So we actually generate rights when we enter into contracts. When you sign, for a loan, maybe a student loan, maybe an auto loan, you are creating a right on the part of the lender to collect from you. And you also have a right for the disbursement of the loan. When you click on something on your computer screen, you may be entering into a contract and you may be creating rights. Okay. Now, generally speaking, at least under the US construct, constitutional rights are really restrictions on government conduct. Now, I've already made it bewildering. All right. And I'll go back to Raykov's slide. Bewildered. Don't worry if you're bewildered. Here is a great professor of the history of rights law. He says it's bewildering. As a lawyer, I think of constitutional rights as restrictions on government conduct. In other words, what does the First Amendment mean? It means the government cannot interfere with your speech. If you're not familiar with my phrase First Amendment, the First Amendment of the US Constitution provides for freedom of speech and freedom of religion. And we'll talk more about it, don't worry. We'll use it as a model for some of the issues that come up in terms of free speech. But what it means to a lawyer is the government cannot restrict your speech. What the Second Amendment means to a lawyer is the government cannot restrict your right to bear arms, to own a gun, and so on down the line. Or the Fourth Amendment right that I was just referring to about search and seizure. The government cannot seize and search through your stuff unless it has probable cause, and in some cases a warrant. And we'll talk about that too, because these are interesting examples. It doesn't mean your roommate can't search through your stuff. These constitutional rights are generally restrictions on government conduct. But I pointed out to you that some of that language suggests that the drafters of the 10 Amendments, the drafter was actually James Madison, but that he believed that these were transcendent natural law rights, and that the government was just recognizing them. Okay. Now, we have to mention again from this period the British philosopher and great thinker John Locke, because the rights-based political views of the U.S. Constitution draw from Locke as a primary source. Locke put forth a theory of unalienable rights, and characteristics of Locke's thought are the following. One, that they are endowed by the Creator, that they are natural law rights. And he specifically mentioned life, liberty, and property. And these are important rights for us to contemplate the meaning of them, and we'll explore them. Locke also talked about I'm going to say the natural law of the formation of government. And in Locke's model, the social contract model, the power of self-governance belongs to the people, is the inherent natural right of the people. And the people agree to grant certain powers to the government. The government only possesses those powers that have been expressly granted. And, this is the theory, sort of thought experiment of people living in the state of nature. They possess all the natural rights that are inherent to a human person, but they decide to band together and to create a social compact and to create a government. And so they surrender some of their natural rights to the government. And in return, they are guaranteed security. But the governmental powers are limited to what has been expressly granted. Locke also believed and taught that the law of nature limited what may be accumulated and decreed that no man can have such portion of things of this world as to deprive his needy brother a right to the surplusage of his goods. That's good 17th century English terminology, right? What does this mean? Well, this means that even though Locke strongly advocated, recognized, and defended a right to property, he did not see that right as unlimited. He wrote just what you see there displayed on your screen, that you don't have a right to, the surplusage. Surplusage means more than you need. You don't have a right to more than you need when there are other people in need. This is revolutionary doctrine. This is the very root of the American legal system, and it gets lost, of course. As justice gives every man a title to the product of his honest industry, So charity gives every man a title to so much out of another's plenty as will keep him from extreme want, for God requires him to afford to the wants of his brother. This is John Locke on the natural law of charity, which creates a limitation on the very important right to property. Now, another highly influential thinker during this period of the conflict of religion and ideology is the French thinker known as Montesquieu. And his book, The Spirit of the Laws, or The Spirit of Law, was read by the American founders and was very important in their thinking. Montesquieu spoke about three forms of government. The despotic government is maintained by fear of the ruler. The monarchy is maintained by love of honor, rank, and privilege. But the republic, which he certainly considered the highest form, is maintained by love of virtue. So you can only have a republic, you can only have a functioning republic if the people love virtue. And that means put the community ahead of private interest. This is the writing of Montesquieu. Montesquieu also stressed that in order to preserve liberty, you have to have the separation of powers into three branches: the executive, the legislative, and the judicial. And so this number three was very important to Montesquieu. Again, I'm reminded of the divine principle, where the number three is important. And we see, threes everywhere. We have three bones in our fingers. We have three parts of our bodies. I mean, there's always the beginning, the middle, and the end. I mean, Montesquieu taught that this is a natural law principle, that the powers of government need to be separated into three branches, and you shouldn't violate this very important natural law. Your executive should only be doing executive things. If your executive is doing legislative and judicial things, you're not going to have a properly functioning government. Your legislature, your legislature should enact laws. They shouldn't be conducting criminal trials, known as a bill of attainder. That's specifically prohibited by the Constitution. Your executive has its role. The proper powers have to be separated and distributed to these three branches. And Montesquieu also emphasized that there must be due process of law. Now, is three branches the natural law of government? Other constitutions have had additional branches. Simón Bolívar's constitution had a fourth branch to supervise and carry out elections. The Republic of China constitution that we're going to be looking at has 5 yuan: legislative, executive, judicial, and then there was an examination branch, kind of like a civil service branch, to distribute government offices, government employment. Government employment is really important. There are all kinds of entitlements and rights when you're working for the government, and privileges that has to be distributed properly. The Chinese constitution has a branch of government just for that purpose, and it has another branch for controlling and auditing. And in fact, even in the United States, it is argued that the executive branch has given birth to an entirely new fourth branch, the bureaucracy. That while the bureaucracy is putatively in name under the president, it has its own, functioning powers independent of the president. It's something other than just the executive branch. And of course, recently, in the last few years, we've heard a lot about the deep state, that the bureaucracy has a life of its own. The Divine Principle book addresses this. On page 62 of Exposition of the Divine Principle, we find this wonderful quote: "In the human body, the lungs, heart, and stomach maintain harmonious interaction with the directions of the brain transmitted through the spinal cord and the peripheral nervous system. By analogy, the three branches of government in the ideal world, the legislative, judicial, and executive branches, will interact in harmonious and principled relationships when they follow God's guidance as conveyed through Christ and the people of God." So Divine Principle suggests that indeed three branches of government conforms with natural law. However, Reverend Moon made these additional comments, which I find interesting. When establishing this new nation, we will establish a separation of three powers and a separation of two additional powers. With this authority, the right wing will spread over everything and will envelop the left wing. In the era of God's reign, there will be a separation of five powers, not a separation of three powers. Judicial, legislative, and administrative branches were created for the sake of establishing a nation. However, in order to find the one sovereign of the world, five branches that include the mass media and the banking institutions, on top of the existing three separations of power, must be established. Then through that, the King of Peace will appear. Until now, the world has been governed under the separation of three powers, but from now on, things will move toward a separation of five powers. And centered on that, we will be able to use the word peace. Sorry for that typo. We will be able to use the word peace. In America, there is no peace. Oh, my goodness. In America, indeed, there is no peace. American democracy has given rise to remarkable, deep conflict. That's not just a modern phenomenon. And politicians being really nasty toward one another is not something new. However, most of us in America are dismayed with the depth of division and hostility, lack of confidence that we find today. So certainly in America, there's no peace. And I only want to draw from this the idea that while those three branches are not going away, there may be more branches. Now, let me look at some interesting American documents. And, please bear with me that this course is not just a course about U.S. law, but as I've explained, U.S. law is very important. It's also the area of law that I'm most familiar with and I can speak most extensively on. But I will make references to the laws and traditions of other societies and other countries as well. But let's look at these formative American documents because they are fascinating, okay? The first one I want to mention is the Mayflower Compact. And one of the fascinating aspects of the Mayflower Compact is it comes very close to being an actual example of John Locke's concept of people in the state of nature voluntarily, through their free will, coming together to form a social contract. We didn't do that. I didn't do that. No one asked me if I wanted to surrender some of my rights, so that I could be an American. I was born a citizen. The Mayflower Compact, these pilgrims, these travelers were on a small boat known as the Mayflower, traveling across the Atlantic Ocean, and they had a charter to create a settlement in the Virginia colony. They had a royal charter to create a settlement in the Virginia colony. Now, as many people know, through this, the 1619 Project, slavery had come to the Virginia colony. In one sense, the Virginia colony was tainted by slavery. And it came to pass that this little boat of devout pilgrims did not make landfall in the Virginia colony where they had the charter to create a settlement. Instead, they landed much further north. They landed in what is now Massachusetts. And of course, as a result, they encountered much harsher weather, much more difficult conditions. But I might say they were preserved. They were preserved from the taint of Virginia, and yet their charter had no validity in this territory, and therefore they found themselves in something like John Locke's state of nature. And so they banded together on their own. Actually, the captain would not allow them to leave the boat until they had agreed to some form of government. While they were on the boat, they were subject to British maritime law. The captain was in charge. But once they landed on land, they would have no legal construct in which they were operating. And so he said, we're going to form an agreement. And look at how it begins. In the name of God, amen. That's how the Mayflower Compact begins. In the name of God, amen. They couldn't even wait to put that at the end. They were very devout people. The Mayflower Compact of November 11th, 1620, says that they have embarked upon this voyage for the glory of God and the advancement of the Christian faith. And they do solemnly and mutually in the presence of God combine ourselves into a civil body politic for the general good of the colony. We promise all due submission and obedience. So here we have almost like Locke's, as I said, Locke's theoretical construct is actually happening. They are surrendering some of their natural rights, which they would possess there in the wilderness. And they are, for the general good of the colony, they are promising submission and obedience to the law, to whatever the, this commonwealth, this legislative body that they were creating, whatever it decides to do. Now, another important thing, now we're going to jump ahead, 150 years, and where the colonies have developed, and there are now 13 colonies, and there is friction between the colonies and the colonial administration, the empire, the British Empire that is controlling these colonies. And Thomas Paine writes a book called Common Sense, which is extremely popular and widely read. And he says that the time had come to correct the errors in Britain's constitution and to found new governments free of kings and hereditary rule, governments in which all officials owed their power to popular choice. So at the time that the colonies were seeking independence, most of the arguments for independence were based on the idea that the colonies had been mistreated by the king. In fact, a huge section of the Declaration of Independence is devoted, that's the American document that proclaims independence from England. A huge section of the Declaration of Independence is devoted to a list of grievances and atrocities committed by King George. And of course, everything is, should I say it, exaggerated to the nth degree. So that those are arguments based on mistreatment by the king. But here in this influential booklet, Common Sense, he's talking about errors in Britain's constitution. That has to be an invocation of natural law. He's basically saying there is a natural law principle concerning government, and the British are violating it. They're violating it because they believe in kings and hereditary rule. And you have to have a government in which officials owe their power to popular choice. And so all this thinking is eventually reflected in the United States Declaration of Independence, whereby the 13 colonies proclaim themselves to be free and independent states. That is what we would today call countries. So Connecticut, New York, Massachusetts, they became countries by virtue of the Declaration of Independence. Now, let me look at some of this rights language that is found in that declaration. Thomas Jefferson, who drafted the Declaration of Independence, drew language from the very important writer George Mason, who had drafted the Virginia Declaration of Rights. And I want to contrast Mason's language with the language that Jefferson uses, because it's really interesting, okay? Mason, in the Virginia Declaration of Rights, wrote that all men are born equally free and independent. Jefferson transformed that into the, what could I say, the timeless phrase, all men are created equal. Let me ask you, which language do you like better? All men are born equally free and independent, or all men are created equal? I mean, in a way, I like them both for different reasons. I like that Jefferson has emphasized created. And don't forget, this is from John Locke too. I mean, the rights come from God. But Mason's phrase is actually easier to understand. You know, in what sense are we equal? We're equally free. We're equally independent at birth. Mason wrote, men have certain inherent natural rights of which they cannot by any compact deprive or divest their posterity. Jefferson called them unalienable rights. So these are rights that you cannot give away to the Commonwealth or to the body politic. You cannot, by any compact, deprive or divest your posterity of inherent natural rights. Each generation is born with these. Mason wrote, among which are the enjoyment of life and liberty, with the means of acquiring and possessing property, and pursuing and obtaining happiness and safety. And of course, Jefferson distilled that down to life. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And Jefferson avoided using the word property in the Declaration of Independence. Property at that time, and for many years thereafter, was a controversial term because it included slaves for the Southerners. And the Northerners, many of them, were adamantly against the concept that you could own another human being. So the word property itself was freighted with this unpleasant association. So Jefferson did not put life, liberty, and property. He did not exactly copy the words of Mason. And remember, this was the Virginia Declaration of Rights. So for this Declaration of Rights for all 13 colonies, he didn't emphasize that the right to acquire and possess property is a fundamental human right. And he jumped right to the pursuit of happiness. It has been pointed out by many that the men who wrote these documents were not living up to the spirit of these documents. Well, as religious people, we are certainly familiar with this problem. All right, we uphold an ideal that we fall short of, but nevertheless, we uphold that ideal. This is Abraham Lincoln talking about that particular point. The founders meant simply to declare the right so that the enforcement of it might follow as fast as circumstances should permit. So here's Abraham Lincoln at the time of the Civil War saying, in a sense, do not judge them too harshly. They declared the right, and to declare the right was a great thing. The enforcement of the right would follow as fast as circumstances should permit. And here was Lincoln, of course. This was prior to the Civil War. So he is on the verge of initiating, or at least participating in, upholding his responsibility to fight a great civil war in order to free the slaves, in order that this country could move closer to realizing its ideal. They meant to set up a standard maxim for free society, which should be familiar to all and revered by all, constantly looked to, constantly labored for, and even though never perfectly attained, constantly approximated, and thereby constantly spreading and deepening its influence and augmenting the happiness and value of life to all people of all colors everywhere. Now, this view that the unfolding of history, and I guess in this case specifically American history, is moving towards a great ideal, is part of a current of thought called transcendentalism. And this is a minister, a preacher named Theodore Parker, who was an exponent of transcendentalism during the period when Lincoln lived and thought. Here we are in his writing, The Present Crisis, written in 1856, just before the American Civil War. Theodore Parker wrote, "By democracy, I mean government over all the people, by all the people, and for the sake of all." Well, many of you will recognize Lincoln's phrase, government of the people, by the people, for the people. This is coming from this transcendentalist preacher named Theodore Parker. Then he says, this is not the democracy of the parties, but it is that ideal government, the reign of righteousness, the kingdom of justice, which all noble hearts long for and labor to produce, the ideal whereunto mankind slowly draws near. And maybe you will think of Chanilguk, the great kingdom of God. Here is the American program of political principles. All men are endowed by their creator with certain natural rights. In respect thereto, all men are equal. The Constitution itself is a provisional compromise between the ideal political principle of the Declaration and the actual selfishness of the people, North and South. And he goes on to say, the American Revolution, with American history sense, is an attempt to prove by experience this transcendental proposition, to organize the transcendental idea of politics. The idea demands for its organization a democracy, a government of all, for all, and by all. So this is the great idea expressed in the American Declaration of Independence. And I think I'm going to stop there.
Well, let's give Bill a virtual round of applause. I mean, you can feel his passion, his love for the content that he's conveying, and I think the students really grasp it and appreciate it so much. You know, a couple of times you'll hear him refer to, I'm talking about the U.S. Constitution because he's dealing with and explaining terms like, what do I mean by First Amendment? That's because these students are from Nepal and India and Philippines and Czech Republic and other parts of Europe and the world and the United States. So it's an online class which has the advantage of having people from all over the world. Anyway, wonderful presentation, rich with content. So I'm going to move straight away to our two wonderful commentators. I'm going to introduce them both very briefly. Many of you know them. Mr. Farley Jones is an elder in our Family Federation community. He was the early president of our movement when Father and Mother Moon first came to America, welcomed them, HJI alumni, a practicing attorney for a good part of his life, and leader in many capacities for our movement. Peter Ross, his blessed family, also, I think, was married around the same time that Lynn and I were in 1982. And he is a practicing attorney and is working closely with HSA properties, and particularly the Manhattan Center in New York City. I was walking by the Manhattan Center on Monday, and there was a line about a mile long of young people who were coming in, I think, to get a glimpse of Ed Sheeran, if I got that right, who was there that day, famous singer. So without further ado, I'm going to first ask Mr. Jones, followed by Mr. Ross. They will each speak for about 7 minutes. Farley?
Thank you, Dr. Walsh. Thank you all for being here. I must say, what a tour de force lecture from Professor Lay. Amazing to me that he produced that much content with so few notes. Of course, he had some PowerPoint images to refer to, but remarkable presentation, full of positive energy. And that was Bill Lay. So what a blessing he was to all of us. I don't have that level of energy and or simplicity, but so to stay on target here, I'm going to mostly read my notes and my reflections, which are triggered. My thoughts are triggered by Bill's final comments referring to transcendentalism, as I will explain. But for those of you who went to school in the United States, I'll briefly refresh your memory of everything that we learned when we were high school students in American history. Constitution was 55 people gathered in 1787, starting about May. 4 months later, they had this Constitution. 39 of them signed it. A bunch didn't. Of the 13 colonies, then 12 were represented at the Constitutional Convention. Rhode Island declined to send anybody because I think the people of Rhode Island were very apprehensive about what was going to happen in Philadelphia. The Constitution provided that it would become effective only with ratification by 9 of the 13 states. The first state to ratify it was Delaware. The last state, the ninth state, was New Hampshire, which put it over the top. And the last state to ratify it was Rhode Island. And they're apparently only under threat of an embargo by the rest of the state. So Rhode Island was sticking to its principles. Now, as I mentioned, Bill talked about transcendentalism. My brief research suggests that transcendentalism came to the fore in the mid-19th century. Ralph Waldo Emerson, his primary proponent, was born in the early 1800s. The view of the founders, from what I've read, would not be consistent with a transcendental view. They were very concerned about the state of humanity, and that's reflected in some of their statements. Let me quote John Jay. John Jay was one of the signers of the Constitution. He was the first governor of New York. He was an ambassador to Britain, and he was one of the authors of the Federalist Papers, which were a set of arguments for adoption of the Constitution. John Jay said this: the mass of men is neither wise nor good. That sentiment was echoed by Alexander Hamilton, another founding father. We all know him well. Famous founding father. The people are turbulent and changing. They seldom judge or determine right. So that was at least some of the thinking and the assessment of the human condition by at least two, but I'm sure many more of the founders. They had to create a constitution that would address this perception of the state of the consciousness of the people who would be governed under this constitution, and create a document that would work in the context of that reality. So not trusting human nature, the founders would go on to create a constitution which is premised on such principles as the separation of powers, checks and balances, ultimately judicial review, and finally a Bill of Rights. Bill of Rights were adopted only 3 years after the Constitution was ratified, and the Constitution was able to be ratified because there was a promise from the original signers that a Bill of Rights would be created after its adoption. And as I recall, the Bill of Rights was finally adopted in 1792, several years after the final ratification. Then, even after the Constitution was created, there was a recognition of its fragility. According to John Adams, the second president, our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other kind of people. And Benjamin Franklin, of all the dispositions and habits which lead to political prosperity, religion and morality are indispensable support. Now, what I found interesting is that both men emphasize both requirements, a religious people and a moral people. Now, I don't think they're referring to the idea that, well, if the people is not religious, at least they'll be moral. In other words, religious people and moral people. No, I think they're referring to both requirements being necessary within the people generally. So the question is, it comes, because they qualified, in my view, the need for a religious people to also be a moral people. The question is whether religion itself is a sufficient premise on which to base the successful functioning of the Constitution. I think the answer is no. They were correct in that assessment. Both religion and more. Why do I say that? Why? Well, certainly in our common era, let's think of the 9/11 terrorists. They were religious people. Well, I have strong opinions about Vladimir Putin. As I understand it, he's a religious man, motivated by a religious vision. But look at all the destruction and evil, from my point of view, that he has wreaked upon the Ukrainian people. So I think Bill mentioned John Locke's emphasis on people needing to have a love of virtue. It's not just religion. We need virtue. We need religion that's enlightened religion. I appreciate very much the Dalai Lama's sentiment. My religion, the Dalai Lama said, is kindness.
Farley, I think we're going to have to, if you could wrap up.
Off. All right. Let me just say one other thing. Has our Constitution been successful? Yes, it has been. Not only within in this country, but it is the most widely adopted, or elements of it are the most widely adopted constitution of any constitution that's ever been created. Also, as I understand it, I think I'm correct to say, is even though we're a very young country compared to other countries, we have the longest standing written constitution. So we've been blessed by this constitution. Thank you.
Thank you, Farley Jones. Excellent. Mr. Peter Ross, you have the floor, sir.
Good evening, everybody. I commend HJI for maintaining this wonderful tradition with Constitution Day, and I'm honored to be able to speak, but especially honored to be asked to comment on Bill's just terrific lecture. I've heard it a couple of times, and I just laugh, and I get delighted by it. Bill's joy of teaching, well, first his care and concern for his students in helping craft the course, his joy and his excitement, his humor and delight as he's hearing what he's saying, he's just getting more and more excited. And among other things, may his legacy in education live on through his recorded teachings. I too, I'm going to use notes in order so I can stay within my 7 minutes, because if an Irishman starts to improv, once again, I'll have to apologize to Dr. Walsh. I'm going to talk about rights, branches of government, Lincoln, and 2 closing comments. After briefly reviewing the historical origin of rights and their modest expansion in the mid-17th century, Bill expressed his own astonishment, almost a humorous dismay, at how pervasive the efforts have become in more modern times to expand what constitutes a legal right. Bill found solace in Jack Rakow's perfect description of such efforts as bewildering modern associations, and he referred back to it a couple of times. I've happened upon a couple of recent interviews with Dr. Rakow, and I've come to appreciate his rational and historical perspectives, especially on current matters in current times. So I've added his book to my reading list, and the book title is Original Meanings, Politics and Ideas in the Making of the Constitution. A good read for everyone. To punctuate this same point about the frenzy to establish new rights, Philip Howard characterized it in his 1994 book, The Death of Common Sense, as follows. He characterized it as the great rights rush. For me, a shocking and perhaps very recent example of a truly bewildering modern association with an otherwise legally recognized right is by a small vocal group of parents and medical personnel who advocate for the right to mutilate prepubescent children confused by their own immature sense of their own sexuality. What's next? Branches of government. After comparing the US system of 3 branches with an increased number of branches in other jurisdictions, I appreciated that Bill referenced the divine principle and its affirmation of the same 3 branches as the US system. But I was really intrigued when Bill later referred to Father Moon's suggestion of 5 branches of government by adding 2 more, mass media and banking. I now suggest adding another to Father's list of 5, a religious branch. Not my genius or inspiration by any means, for it was Father himself who suggested such a branch, albeit in a different context. In his 2000 speech at the UN, Father proposed that the UN become bicameral, to be comprised of 2 bodies. The first, consisting of an upper branch, an upper house, its members would be composed of religious leaders and other conscientious leaders of society. By his definition, interreligious and global, therefore omitting anything nativist or sectarian. The second that Father proposed is essentially the existing General Assembly, composed of representative members of the constituent nations that comprise the United Nations. Father further went on to say the former, the Religious Council, would be representative of the mind. The continuing General Assembly would be representative of the body. In that brilliant and audacious speech, Father reiterated that it is only religion that can solve history and the world's problems. This remains true for the world as it does for the US in its current state of division and discord, as Bill referred to it. With an amoral executive, a stagnant legislature, and a judiciary scrambling to keep the wheels on our republic. To paraphrase the character Dick the Butcher in Shakespeare's Richard II, kill all the lawyers and kiss bye-bye to the last line of defense to a civilized society. Lincoln. I really appreciated Bill addressing the criticism leveled against the founders for individually falling short of the ideals they enshrined in our sacred founding documents. And Bill suggested a terrific and succinct response, one I will use at Thanksgiving dinner. Bill compared our less than individually perfect founders to religious adherents who individually fall short of his or her own deeply held religious ideals. Right on point. And by the way, I don't recall previously reading the Lincoln quote that Bill referenced. Also right on the money. For Lincoln encouraged the constant striving for improvement and progress towards attaining the highest standards in order to augment, and here I quote Lincoln, the happiness and value of life to all people of all colors everywhere. What a bold statement when Lincoln made it at the time of the Civil War. And yet that rings true for our times. 2 closing comments. I encourage you all to read Walter Isaacson's forthcoming book, which will be available in early November. The title is The Greatest Sentence Ever Written. Isaacson is referring to the second sentence of the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among them are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And to close, Tom, in any discussion about law, especially amongst a very divergent view of opinion, even within our own unification community, I think it's always good to remember the wise words of Arnold Toynbee. Toynbee was an English professor, philosopher of history, and a historian. And he was widely read in the 1940s and 50s. And he wrote, "Life and law must be kept closely in touch, as you can't adjust life to law, you must adjust law to life. The only point in having law is to make life work. Otherwise, there will be explosions." Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Once again, excellent presentation, and we won't take Shakespeare literally from Richard II. Well done, sir. We have some time to open it up. I do want to acknowledge that Mrs. Tycho Lay is with us this evening. And Tycho, if you feel called to say a word of any kind at any moment, please let me know. Maybe I'll ask you again at the end if you care. And I also note that Jenna Lay is also with us in case Jenna would care to. No obligation, and do not mean to put either of you on the spot, but we're very grateful that you're here, and you're here among people that love and respect Professor Lay greatly. Maybe I'll ask Dr. Thomas Ward, who worked closely with Professor Lay, both at the University of Bridgeport and then again at HJI, if you'd like to make a brief comment.
Oh, no, I feel put on the spot, so I was looking forward to just listening tonight. Well, anyway, Bill's presentation was masterful. I mean, I'm just reminded again tonight as I listened to him, and as somebody mentioned, I think on the evening prior to his Sungwa, that everything just flows from him very naturally, and it's just amazing that that incredible gift that God's given to Bill. And I really appreciated the comments that we heard tonight, both by Mr. Farley Jones and also by Mr. Peter Ross. First of all, because each of them are close to Bill in heart, and they are also both seminary graduates, and they are attorneys who have dedicated their lives to the law. And I really felt that their comments in each case were very useful. I think the observation that I think both of them made, the differentiation, particularly first of all by Farley Jones, the differentiation between religion and virtue. That's a very, very important point. And I also think that in his own way, Mr. Peter Ross made the same point in his concluding affirmation of the emphasis that Father Moon made upon the need for an integration within the United Nations of not just statesmen, but people of religion, but people who would be able to transcend their denominations, and likewise, in that sense, converging with Farley Jones, be people of virtue. So I really thank you, Dr. Walsh, for putting together tonight's program. It's an exceptional program. It's a reminder of a person who lived an extraordinary life, and it also gave all of us an opportunity to reflect more on the Constitution, something that Bill really loved and saw as a living document, and really tried to convey to his students. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Ward. Anyone else who cares to make a comment? I'm not seeing much in the chat. Maybe we didn't announce that so much, but if anyone would like to be acknowledged. I also can't see the whole gallery. Maybe I can try to move to a more gallery mode and then see more. So if you want to raise your hand or make a comment, we've got a few minutes left here. I know I saw Patrick Hickey, who I haven't seen in a long time, out west. If you wanted to say a word, Patrick, we'd love to hear from you. or others that are here?
Can I make a comment?
Yes, please.
Yes, I'm Fumiaki Kono from Japan. I'm a brother of Bill in Japan, brother-in-law.
Oh, wonderful. Wonderful.
Yes, I'm a little bit older than before, but I'm 1 year older than Bill, you know. So Bill was my little brother in America. And each time he came to Japan, we welcomed him with the whole family and talk many things, except law and constitutions. But I miss him very much today, even more so, because, in fact, in my university, I study constitutions, Japanese constitutions, you know? And before the Second World War, our constitution was based on German model. And after Pacific War, it was based on American Constitution.
Yes.
Actually, we are guided by the scholars of America
Yes.
to form our new democratic Constitution. And I miss Bill even more so because, I study a detail of some of the Japanese Constitution. I know that it was guided by the American, but my understanding at the time, 19 years or 20 years old student, was not deep enough. I realized so much, John Locke and Montesquieu and Thomas Paine, these fundamental scholars who actually interpreted the natural law and then developed into a democracy, and on which our democracy is supposed to be based currently. So I miss him very much.
Yeah,
And, that is the impression. I hope he could come back, and obviously today he returned for us.
Yeah, that's
And
right.
he gave us a real Bill as a scholar. And I'm very happy to hear him very much. And thank you. Thank you.
So we're delighted you came, Mr. Kono. Wonderful intervention as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Sincerely. Taiko, do you want to add a word?
Thank you, my brother Miyaki from Japan.
Yeah.
That he joined because he has international mind.
Very good.
He's a living in Rikuzen Takada, where the tsunami wiped the city.
Wow.
And he loved town, even though he is out of the country for a long time. So he loves cats. He loves nature. So also, I appreciate Bill. And also Dr. Walsh, Dr. Ward, Dr. Ross, and Dr. Farry Jones. It's an incredible man that I was not respectful any lawyers. And now I see higher understanding for God, for humanity, and the value of United States of Constitution. And it's in the process of now we are inputting ourselves to transform ourselves and to transform the world. So thank you for your putting on the bill for this such an occasion. He will be totally honored by you. You are light of the world, and also all people who participated have same vibrations. So thank you for this opportunity. I'm so impressed. I was honored to be in this place. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Taiko. Beautiful, heartfelt words. We feel Bill's love and presence continuously. Thank you.
Dr. Walsh, Patrick Hickey, I think, is ready to speak. And after him,
yeah.
Roger Weather. After him, Roger Rutherford had raised his hand.
Very good. So Patrick and then Roger.
Thank you, Dr. Walsh, and everyone. I wasn't prepared to speak, but listening to Bill and we've all aged in the 40 plus years since we sat listening to both Dr. Ward and Bill Lay. And I have to say, Bill is every bit as bright and enthusiastic as I recall him in those just famous and precious Causa and American Leadership days. And I want to thank, all of the academic and legal members of our community for keeping alive the vision that moved us all in our early days. And it's heartening to see that it's being carried on, and not only in the spirit of Bill, and honoring Bill today was very special, I think, for all of us. And thank you for doing that, Dr. Walsh and others.
Well, thank you. And thank you for all your good work. We know you've been in the political world for some time, and that's not an easy world to navigate, but you've done it masterfully. So we're happy to see you and have you with us tonight. Roger?
Good evening, everybody. I have a question, I guess, for our two commentators, since I can't put it to Bill directly, but how much of the prosperity of America do you think is a result of the structure and the wording of our Constitution as compared to, say, the inherent religious foundation of the country itself? So, for example, if we'd had the religious foundation from the beginning, but we'd had a very different constitution, would it have resulted in a different country? Anybody want to go first?
Nice one. Farley, any thoughts?
Well, that's a difficult question, Roger. But I think generally it's thought that the Protestant work ethic was the origin of the prosperity of the United States. So I would say, from my limited understanding, that not religion per se, but the work ethic that arose from a religious orientation was certainly a major factor. And I would also say that all that happened within the framework, the legal framework created by the Constitution. So that is not irrelevant at all. Peter, any thoughts on your side?
Well, I think it's both, Roger. I learned a lot from Bill's lecture, Tycho, and I will continue to, I'm sure, learn from his teachings. But when you look at natural law, to me it was the most significant influence on the founding of the Constitution, and it presupposes that people are people of virtue, and therefore directed by a religious impulse. And I think Bill at one point even quoted Locke or Montesquieu as the natural law of charity. You get what's good enough for you, and then you share. So the system of government we have, I think, goes, hyung sung, sung sung together. The religious impulse, the Constitution itself not being directly religious on its face, but we presuppose going into this system and form of government that everybody is motivated and directed by religious impulse, or, as Farley made the distinction earlier, moral impulse. Father might say conscience. And so what we have, I think, is the most perfect expression to go along with that. It allows everybody to be free and to engage in commerce and be prosperous. But at the end of the day, your conscience, your religious impulse should and ought to be reminding you to share with others. And I hope that's something of an answer to a complex question.
It's not an easy question to answer. I think the two are very closely intertwined. But I recently read a book talking about the summer of when they actually wrote the Constitution, and I didn't realize how much contention there was, how much argument, how much fighting there was between all the different factions to put that document together. And I think in many respects, it was designed to be for a sinful people, to try and guard against our own fallen nature as much as possible. So it was one of the things that I took out of reading this book. So,
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. That in politics, you not only have the ideal, but you also have a doctrine of the fall. That somehow there is, in religious language, sinfulness at play that requires even the principle of checks and balances is the lack of trustworthiness of, say, a single center of authority and power, and why monarchy was to some extent downplayed, where it had centralization of power. So you disperse the power somewhat. We are really about out of time here. Is anyone that really wanted to say something that didn't get a chance?
This is Russ.
Yes, Russ.
I was inspired by 2 points. The first is that the pursuit of happiness was actually closely linked to the whole notion of free enterprise, and because that is so much a part of life, and then the follow along on that is the need for the conscience to govern your assembly of wealth. And, being in the movement all these years, for so many years, we lived in just completely virtuous kind of standards. And, one of the things, just reflecting on Bill's life, he did so much throughout his entire life to do everything he could to serve the true parents and our brothers and sisters in this nation. I remember going to the July 4th celebrations at his home, and he would always prepare these beautiful presentations that were really insightful and nourishing. So the joy that he felt towards the Constitution in our country was always part of those. Thank you so much for putting this together.
Yeah, thank you, Russ. Yeah, you just reminded me in July 4th, we were at the Rosses, and Bill was not in good health, but he joined us virtually, and Noah got him online for a passionate reading of the Gettysburg Address, and Bill explained that there are like 5 or 6 handwritten versions, none of them exactly the same, but he gave us background on which version he was reading, and then did a beautiful recitation of that version of the Gettysburg Address, which is rich with content, a 2-minute speech that's immortal in history. He loved American history. He was a real patriot. He was born in Japan. His father was military from World War II, and even the D-Day, and as well as the Korean War. And so has a great background. Tycho, we're honored you were with us today. I see you have company there that we're happy to see you living joyfully, and that other members of the family are here. So I think hesitantly, but I think necessarily, I'm going to draw things to a close. I thank Stephen Boyd Thank you so much for being central to putting this together, and Mrs. Angelica Buczynski for doing the tech and the graphics and all that's involved in putting this kind of program together. Very, very happy that all of you joined us, and sorry we went over a little bit longer. Thank you, Fumiaki Kono. Wonderful, eloquent. You have to come as a guest speaker at HJI.
Yes, certainly.
Yeah, there's Dean Boyd and Angelica there with us, and we have Young Soon Winter who's with us. She's our director of alumni relations. So if you're an alumni, please be in touch with Young Soon. If you're not an alumni, then talk to Dean Boyd about enrolling so that you can become an alumni. All right, everybody. God bless.